A boy is kicked out of the foster care system on his 18th birthday. With his younger sister still trapped inside it, he receives a final letter from his parents containing a strange inheritance, a rusted windmill on a forgotten plot of land. What he discovered there wasn't just about property. It was about the truth that would either save his family or break it forever. If you've ever felt lost and wondered if there was a place for you in the world, this story is for you. Stick with me, and if it resonates, consider subscribing. We talk about this stuff here. The day I turned 18 wasn't a celebration. There was no cake, no off-key singing, no pile of brightly wrapped presents. There was just a cardboard box, a signature on a discharge form, and the heavy final click of a door shutting behind me. For 2 years, since our parents died, the system had been my home. A home with peeling paint, scheduled meals that tasted of nothing, and the constant low hum of other people's misery. I'd learned to make myself small, to be invisible, to want for nothing so I wouldn't be disappointed. But on that Tuesday in October, invisibility was no longer an option. I was officially an adult, which meant I was officially homeless. Ms. Albright, my caseworker for the last 6 months, stood with me on the gray concrete steps of the facility. She had a kind face, etched with the sort of exhaustion that comes from caring too much in a world that cares too little. She'd tried. I knew she had. But the system is a machine, and it doesn't have time for individual stories. It just processes you. She handed me a thick manila envelope. "This is it, Leo. Everything the state has for you." Inside was my birth certificate, my social security card, a bus pass with $10 of credit, and a list of shelters. My entire existence condensed into a folder. "And this," she said, pulling a smaller, more personal-looking envelope from her coat pocket. It was cream-colored, heavy, and sealed with a wax stamp I didn't recognize. My name was written on the front in a familiar looping script that made my throat tighten. My mother's handwriting. "It was left with your file," Ms. Albright explained gently. "Instructions were to give it to you on your 18th birthday, no sooner." I just stared at it, a ghost in my hands. A voice from a world that had ended 2 years ago on a rain-slicked highway. The world where I wasn't an orphan, where my sister Mia wasn't a ward of the state, where the word home meant more than a roof. "What about Mia?" I asked, my voice cracking on her name. It was the only question that mattered. Ms. Albright's expression softened with a practiced pity I'd grown to hate. "She's still in the system, Leo. She's 16. You know the rules. Unless you can prove you have stable housing and a steady income, you can't petition for guardianship." Stable housing, steady income. The words were a mockery. I had a bus pass and a list of places where I might get a bed for the night, if I was lucky. So I'm just supposed to leave her here? The anger I'd been swallowing for 2 years threatened to boil over. "In this place?" "It's not forever," she said, though it didn't sound convincing even to her. 2 more years. Work hard. Get on your feet. You can build a life she can join. You can be the safe place for her to land." A safe place to land. I felt like I was in free fall. I tucked the precious, terrifying letter into the inside pocket of my jacket, the one thing I owned that wasn't issued by the state. I hoisted the cardboard box, which contained 2 pairs of jeans, a few t-shirts, and a worn copy of a book my dad had given me. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it was pinning me to the ground. I looked back at the brick building, at the window on the 3rd floor where I knew Mia would be watching. I couldn't see her, but I could feel her. A phantom limb I was being forced to leave behind. I didn't say goodbye to Ms. Albright. I just turned and started walking, the city sounds swallowing me whole. Each step was a betrayal. Each step took me further from my sister. The weight in my pocket felt like a stone. I didn't know what was inside that envelope, but a part of me was terrified to find out. Hope is a dangerous thing when you have nothing. It can be the one thing that breaks you. I walked for hours just to feel the motion, to put distance between me and that building. The city was a blur of noise and indifference. People hurried past, their faces closed, their paths certain. I was an island, drifting in a current I couldn't control. I ended up in a small, forgotten park, the kind tucked between buildings that no one remembers to maintain. A broken swing creaked a lonely rhythm in the wind. I sat on a bench, the wood cold and damp through my thin jeans, and finally pulled out the envelope. The wax seal was a stylized M for Miller, our family name. I broke it with a trembling thumb. Inside, there wasn't just a letter. There was a key, a heavy, old-fashioned iron key, rusted in places. There was a cashier's check for $500, and there was a folded piece of paper, a formal-looking document. At the top it read, "Quitclaim deed." Beneath it, a letter, written on that same cream-colored paper. My mother's words felt like a direct line to the past, and I had to read them 3 times before they started to make sense. "My dearest Leo," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am so sorry. I'm sorry we won't be there to see you become the wonderful man I know you will be. I need you to be strong, for me and for Mia. The world is not what it seems, and we had to make some very difficult choices to protect you both." My hands were shaking. Protect us? They had died. They had left us. How was that protection? The money is for a bus ticket and supplies. The key is for a lock. But the most important thing is the deed. It's for a piece of property in a town called Havenwood. It's not much, Leo. It's a forgotten place. But it is yours. There was a legal arrangement, a trust. The deed cost $5 to transfer. It's a technicality. The land is ours. It's yours. Havenwood. I'd never heard of it. I looked at the deed. It described a 5-acre plot, complete with a dwelling and appurtenances, including 1 windmill. The purchase price was listed as $5. It felt like a joke, a cruel, elaborate joke. The letter continued. "Go there, Leo, please. Don't ask questions yet, just go. In the cellar of the house, there is an old milk can. Everything you need to understand is inside. This is our last gift to you and Mia. It might not look like much, but it's a foundation. It's a chance. Don't let them take it from you." The letter ended with 3 words that shattered my composure. "We love you." I sat on that bench until the sun went down and the park lights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows. I cried. Not loud, heaving sobs, but the silent, hot tears of a boy who had forgotten how. I cried for my parents. I cried for Mia, trapped behind that window. And I cried for myself, because my mother's last words to me were a riddle and a command to go to a place I didn't know, to claim a home that probably wasn't there, all based on a trust I wasn't sure I had. $500, a key, a deed to a $5 windmill. It was insane. It was impossible. It was the only thing I had. The shelters on Ms. Albright's list were a dead end. They were a continuation of the system, another waiting room. My mother's letter, insane as it was, felt like a door, a different path. I looked at the bus pass in my hand, then at the cashier's check. The logical thing to do was cash the check, find a cheap room for a week, and start looking for a dishwashing job. That was the sensible path. the path Ms. Albright wanted for me. But my mother's voice, her handwriting on the page, pulled at me. Go there, Leo. It was a choice between the grim, predictable reality I knew and a wild, terrifying unknown. Standing at that precipice, I realized I had nothing left to lose. My life had already been stripped down to the studs. Maybe, just maybe, this was my one chance to start building something new. For Mia. I had to try. For her. The bus station was a symphony of desperation. People sleeping on benches, people arguing with the ticketing agents, people staring into the middle distance with the same hollow look I felt in my own eyes. I bought a one-way ticket to a town called Harmony Creek, the closest stop to Havenwood, according to the faded map on the wall. The name felt like a cruel joke. There was no harmony here. The journey took 8 hours. 8 hours of watching the world transform through the grimy window. The dense, vertical gray of the city slowly gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to flat, open farmland, and finally to rolling hills and thick forests that seemed to swallow the road. With every mile, the knot in my stomach tightened. I was leaving the only world I knew. The city was harsh and uncaring, but it was familiar. This was emptiness. This was isolation. The air that hissed from the bus vents smelled stale, a mixture of disinfectant and despair. I kept my hand in my jacket pocket, my fingers wrapped around the cold iron key. It was my anchor, the only solid thing in a world that had become fluid and uncertain. I thought about Mia. Was she at dinner now, pushing listless vegetables around her plate? Was she lying in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, wondering where I was? The thought of her was a physical pain, a sharp ache in my chest. I had to make this work. I had to build that safe place Ms. Albright talked about, not out of paychecks and rental agreements, but out of dirt and rust and a dead woman's hope. The other passengers were ghosts, a young mother with a crying baby, an old man smelling of whiskey, a soldier in uniform staring blankly ahead. We were all running from something, or to something. Or maybe, like me, we were doing both at the same time. I tried to sleep, but my mother's letter played on a loop in my head. It's a foundation. It's a chance. What kind of foundation could be bought for $5? What kind of chance looked like a rusty windmill in a town no one had ever heard of? The bus groaned and shuddered, its headlights cutting a weak path through the deepening twilight. Trees crowded the edge of the road, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the windows. It felt like driving into the past. I pulled out the worn book my dad had given me. It was a collection of poems by a writer I'd never heard of. He'd given it to me for my 16th birthday, just a few months before the accident. He'd pointed to one poem in particular. "This one, Leo," he'd said, his voice serious. "This is how you live. Not with your fists, but with this." I hadn't understood then. I'd wanted a video game. But I kept the book. Now, I opened it to the page he'd marked. The poem was about building things, about the quiet dignity of work, about finding meaning not in the destination, but in the act of creation. It was a language I was only just beginning to understand. As the bus pulled into the poorly lit station at Harmony Creek, the brakes hissing in the silence, I felt a profound and terrifying sense of finality. There was no going back. The city was a memory. The system was a closed door. Ahead of me was only darkness, a 2-mile walk to Havenwood, and the answer to a question I was almost too afraid to ask. What had my parents truly left for me? A gift or a curse? I stepped off the bus into the cold night air. It was different from city air. It smelled of damp earth, of pine needles, of decay and growth all at once. There was one flickering street lamp, a closed-down general store, and a payphone. That was Harmony Creek. I was utterly, completely alone. And for the first time since I'd walked out of that facility, a strange, unfamiliar feeling surfaced. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was determination. I started walking toward Havenwood. The 2-mile walk from Harmony Creek to Havenwood was the longest of my life. There were no sidewalks, just a gravel shoulder that crunched under my worn sneakers. The darkness was absolute, a thick, living thing broken only by the thin beam of the cheap flashlight I'd bought at the bus station. The woods on either side of the road were a wall of black, alive with the rustles and snaps of unseen creatures. Every sound made me jump. I was a city kid, used to the constant, predictable hum of traffic and sirens. This silence was deafening, and the sounds within it were alien and threatening. I clutched the strap of my bag, the cardboard box I'd carried from the home now discarded, and its contents stuffed into a cheap backpack. The iron key in my pocket felt both heavier and more significant with each step. It wasn't just a key, it was a promise, a challenge. I repeated the address from the deed over and over in my head like a mantra. 14 Miller Road. It had to be a sign. My own last name. My parents must have set it up that way. A beacon in the dark. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A rusted, barely readable sign, half swallowed by ivy. Welcome to Havenwood. The town itself was little more than a crossroads. A boarded-up church, a few houses with dark windows, and a gas station with pumps that looked like they hadn't been used in a decade. It was a ghost of a place. My heart sank. This wasn't a foundation. It was a grave. Miller Road was a dirt track branching off the main path. It was more of a suggestion of a road than an actual one, deeply rutted and overgrown. The flashlight beam danced nervously ahead, catching on twisted roots and pale skeletal branches. Then I saw it. Looming out of the darkness, silhouetted against the star-dusted sky, was the Windmill. It was taller than I'd imagined, a skeletal metal giant, its blades frozen and crooked. It looked like a monument to failure. Next to it, set back from the road, was the house. It was a simple 2-story farmhouse, but it was in a state of catastrophic neglect. The porch roof sagged dangerously. A couple of windows were broken and dark like vacant eyes, and the paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood bare and silvered like old bones. It looked like it could collapse in the next strong wind. A dry, bitter laugh escaped my lips. This was it. This was the grand inheritance. A pile of splinters and a tower of rust. I felt a wave of despair so profound it almost buckled my knees. My mother's letter had lied. This wasn't a chance. It was a cruel joke played on a desperate kid. I almost turned around. I could walk back to Harmony Creek, wait for the morning bus, and just disappear. Cash the check and become someone else, somewhere else. But then I thought of Mia. I thought of her face pressed against the glass. I thought of my mother's last words. Don't let them take it from you. Take what? This ruin? I walked up the overgrown path to the front door. The steps creaked and groaned under my weight. The door was swollen in its frame, but the lock was a big, heavy iron thing. I pulled the key from my pocket. It slid into the lock with a gritty, metallic sound. For a moment it wouldn't turn. I put my shoulder into it, jiggling the key, pushing, twisting with all my might, until with a loud protesting shriek of metal, the mechanism gave way. The click echoed in the silent night. I pushed the door open. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, smelling of dust, mice, and something else, something like time itself. I stepped inside, sweeping my flashlight beam across the room. Dust motes danced like a million tiny stars. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like ghostly chandeliers. In the center of the room was a simple wooden table and 2 chairs, all of it covered in a thick layer of gray dust. It looked like the owners had just vanished mid-sentence. My light found the door to the cellar. It was a simple plank door with a small iron latch. My heart started pounding. In the cellar of the house, there is an old milk can. This was it, the moment of truth. I pulled the door open. A set of steep stone steps led down into perfect blackness. The air that rose up was even colder, smelling of damp earth and secrets. I took a deep breath and started down, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky path into the unknown. The cellar was small and lined with stone, the air thick and cold. Shelves lined one wall, holding dusty, empty glass jars. My flashlight beam swept across the dirt floor, searching. And there, in the far corner, almost hidden behind a stack of rotting firewood, was a large, galvanized steel milk can. It was heavy, and the lid was sealed tight. It took me a few minutes of wrestling with it, my fingers raw and cold, before the lid finally popped open with a sigh of compressed air. I shone my light inside. My breath caught. The can was filled with bundles of cash, wrapped in old newspaper and tied with twine. Stacks and stacks of it. More money than I had ever seen in my life. But that wasn't all. On top of the money was another container, a heavy-duty, waterproof document box. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely work the latches. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money. There were letters, dozens of them, all in my mother's handwriting. There was a stack of legal documents, and there was a small, velvet-wrapped object. I unwrapped it. It was a simple silver locket. I opened it. On one side was a tiny picture of my parents on their wedding day, young and smiling. On the other side was a picture of me as a baby, and a space next to it, empty. For Mia. I sank to the dusty floor of that cellar, the flashlight beam illuminating the impossible treasure before me. The money was a shock, but the letters felt like the real discovery. I picked up the one on top. It was addressed to Leo and Mia. I began to read, and the story of my life, the one I thought I knew, began to unravel. My dearest children, it began. If you are reading this, I hope you are together. I hope you are safe. And I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive us. We did not abandon you. We were trying to save you. The words swam before my eyes. The letter went on to explain everything. My father wasn't just an accountant. He worked for a large chemical company, and he had discovered they were knowingly dumping toxic waste in rural areas, poisoning groundwater, and covering it up. He had tried to go through the proper channels, to be a whistleblower, but he was threatened. The company was powerful, connected. The threats became more specific. They mentioned me. They mentioned Mia. They knew our names. They knew our school. We were terrified, my mother wrote. They had made it clear they would do anything to silence us. We couldn't go to the police. They had people everywhere. Our only option was to disappear, to create a new life, a safe place where they could never find us. This land, this house, this was meant to be that place. Your father bought it through a series of shell corporations, paid for in cash, untraceable. We were days away from leaving, from taking you both and starting over, here, in Havenwood. I could almost hear her voice, strained with fear and love. We created a fiction. We made it look like we were running away from debt, that we were irresponsible. We thought it would be better for you to hate us and be safe than to love us and be in danger. The car crash. The police report said it was an accident, a blown tire on a wet road. But Leo, there was nothing wrong with our tires. We believe they ran us off the road. They thought the evidence your father had collected died with us. They were wrong. The letter described a hidden compartment in my father's old office desk, which had been put into storage. Inside was a hard drive containing all the proof: internal memos, illegal dumping schedules, falsified environmental reports. The money in the milk can wasn't from debt. It was their life savings, cash they had been slowly pulling out to build their new life. It was for us, to give us a start, to fix this house, to build the future they were robbed of. It was a war chest. For 2 years I had believed we were a tragedy, an accident, unlucky. But we weren't. We were a target. My parents weren't victims of fate. They were murdered. And they hadn't abandoned us. They had orchestrated the most profound act of protection I could possibly imagine. A plan so complex and heartbreaking it had cost them their lives. The story I had built my identity on, the abandoned son, the resentful orphan, crumbled into dust. I sat in that cold, dark cellar for what felt like hours, surrounded by the ghost of my parents' love. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't the dull ache of loss I had lived with for 2 years. It was a fresh, sharp, agonizing wound. They were real again, not just faded photographs, but heroes who had tried to do the right thing and had paid the ultimate price. I read every letter. My mother's voice guided me through their plan, her words a mixture of fierce love and crippling fear. She wrote about her dreams for this place: a big garden where they could grow their own food, a tire swing on the old oak tree for Mia, a workshop in the barn for my dad. She wrote about me, about my quiet strength, about how she knew I would be the one to hold things together. She saw a man in me when I still felt like a boy. The weight of that expectation was immense. With the grief came anger, a white-hot rage at the faceless company, at the men who had threatened my family and then killed them, leaving me and Mia to be swallowed by the system. They hadn't just taken our parents, they had stolen our home, our history, our truth. The final letter was different. It was sealed separately and marked, "To be read last." It contained a choice. "Leo," my mother wrote, "this is the hardest part. The company that your father fought against, Northwood Development, has been trying to buy up all the land in this valley. They see it as worthless, ready for a cheap buyout and redevelopment. They don't know its history, our history. They have an open offer on this property. We had a lawyer, a good man named Arthur Henderson, set up the trust that held this land for you. He will be contacted by them again now that the property has transferred to you. They will offer you a lot of money. Enough money to set you and Mia up for life. You could walk away from all this, be free of it. No one would blame you." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Money. An easy way out. "Or," the letter continued, "you can stay. You can use the money we left you to fight. The evidence your father collected is still in that storage unit. The hard drive is the key. Mr. Henderson has the key to the unit and the password. If you expose them, They will come after you. They will try to discredit you, threaten you, just like they did to us. But you will have the truth on your side, and you will have this place, our home. The choice is yours, my son. The easy, safe path that leads away from here, or the hard, dangerous path that leads to justice. We never wanted you to have to make this choice. We wanted to make it for you. All I can tell you is that this land is more than just dirt and trees. It's a promise. It's the last piece of us. I dropped the letter. My body was racked with sobs, loud, ugly, and cathartic. I cried for my lost parents. I cried for my sister, who knew none of this. I cried for the 2 years I'd spent hating the people who had loved me most. The cellar was no longer a tomb. It was a sanctuary. The house was no longer a ruin. It was a battleground. And I was no longer just an orphan. I was the son of David and Mary Miller, and I had a choice to make. The money from the developer glittered in my imagination. A clean apartment in a new city. Good schools for Mia. No more looking over our shoulders. A normal life. It was everything I had ever wanted. But then I looked at the locket in my hand. I looked at the empty space where Mia's picture should be. A normal life, bought with the blood of my parents, paid for by the silence that had killed them. It would be a lie. A comfortable, well-furnished lie, but a lie nonetheless. I was 18 years old. I was scared. I was alone. I had every reason in the world to take the money and run. But my father's words from that book of poems echoed in my mind. This is how you live, not with your fists, but with this, with truth, with dignity, with the quiet, back-breaking work of building something that matters. I stood up, my legs stiff. I packed the letters and the locket carefully back into the box. I left the money in the milk can, for now. I walked out of the cellar and back into the dusty house, the first rays of dawn starting to peek through the broken windows. The light, pale and thin, fell across the floorboards. It wasn't much, but it was a start. My first call was to Mia. I used the payphone in Harmony Creek, the receiver cold and greasy against my ear. I fed it a stream of quarters, my hands shaking. When I heard her voice, small and wary on the other end, it was like a lifeline. "Leo, is that you? Where are you?" "I'm okay, Mia. I'm safe." I tried to keep my voice steady, but it was thick with emotion. How could I explain a haunted house, a can full of money, and a 2-year-old murder conspiracy to my 16-year-old sister over a crackling phone line? I couldn't. Not yet. "Listen to me," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Things are complicated, but it's not what we thought. Mom and Dad, they didn't just leave us." I told her a carefully edited version of the truth, that our parents had left us something, a place, a home, that I was there now, that it needed work, a lot of work, but that it was ours. I told her I was going to fix it, for us. "A house?" she asked, her voice a mixture of skepticism and a desperate, fragile hope she tried to hide. "Like a real house?" "Yeah, Mia, a real house." I didn't tell her about the sagging roof or the broken windows. I didn't tell her about the anger and the fear. I just gave her the one thing we hadn't had in 2 years, a future. "I'm going to get you out of there," I promised. "I'm going to build a place for us, and I'm coming back for you." There was a long silence on the line. Then I heard a small sniffle. "Okay, Leo," she whispered. "Okay." My second call was to the lawyer, Arthur Henderson. His number was on a card tucked into the last letter. I called from the same payphone, my heart hammering against my ribs. A calm, steady voice answered. "Henderson." "Mr. Henderson?" I said. "My name is Leo Miller. My mother, Mary Miller, said I should call you." There was a pause. "Leo," he said, his voice softening. "My God, I've been waiting for your call for 2 years." We talked for almost an hour. He was exactly as my mother had described him, calm, pragmatic, and deeply sympathetic. He confirmed everything: the trust, the property transfer, the open offer from Northwood Development, which, he informed me, had just been increased significantly. "They're getting impatient, Leo," he said. "They want that valley. They're offering you a sum that could change your life. You're 18 years old. You've been through hell. No one would think less of you for taking it." "What do you think I should do?" I asked, my voice small. He was silent for a moment. "Your parents were my friends," he said finally. "They were brave, principled people. What I think doesn't matter. What matters is what kind of man you want to be. If you want to sell, I will get you the best possible price. If you want to fight, I will be your lawyer." The words hung in the air between us. Fight. He made it sound so simple. "They killed them, Mr. Henderson." "I know," he said softly. "The police called it an accident. I never believed it. My mom's letter, it mentions a hard drive. I have the key to the storage unit right here in my desk, Leo, and the password. I've been holding them for you. Your father was a meticulous man. If he said the proof is on that drive, it's there." I looked across the street at the boarded-up general store, at the cracked pavement and the weeds growing through them. I thought of the money from the developer. A clean slate, a new life. Then I thought of my parents' smiling faces in the locket. I thought of the empty space waiting for Mia's picture. There was no choice, not really. "I'm not selling," I said, and the words felt like steel in my spine. "I'm staying, and I want that hard drive." There was another pause on the line, but this time I could hear something new in the silence. Respect. "All right, Leo," Mr. Henderson said. "All right. The drive is in a city 3 hours from you. I'll have it couriered to a secure P.O. box in Harmony Creek. It'll be there in 2 days. But you need to be careful. If they find out what you're doing—" "I know," I said. "I'm ready." I hung up the phone, the last of my quarters clattering into the coin return. The sun was higher now, and the world didn't look quite so bleak. I felt a surge of purpose so strong it was dizzying. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't a ward of the state. I was Leo Miller, and I had a war to fight. The 2 days I waited for the hard drive were the longest and shortest of my life. The waiting was a torment, a constant thrum of anxiety. But the work was a salvation. I started with the house. I couldn't fix the roof or the broken windows yet, but I could clean. I found a rusty broom in a lean-to out back, and I swept. I swept away 2 years of dust and neglect. I swept away the cobwebs that felt like the lingering presence of my own despair. Each stroke of the broom was a reclamation. This is my floor. This is my room. This is my house. I used old buckets to haul water from a creek that ran along the back of the property. The water was clear and cold. I washed the windows that weren't broken, scrubbing away the grime until a weak, watery sunlight could finally find its way inside. It felt like I was letting the house breathe again. The physical labor was brutal. My muscles, soft from years of institutional inactivity, screamed in protest. My hands were raw and blistered by the end of the first day. But there was a strange satisfaction in the pain. It was real. It was earned. It was the opposite of the numb, passive existence I had been living. During a break, I explored the barn. It was huge, much larger than the house, with a high vaulted ceiling where pigeons roosted. It was filled with old rusted farm equipment, but in a corner, under a dusty tarp, I found my father's workbench, just as my mother's letter had described. There were his tools, neatly organized, waiting for him. Saws, hammers, wrenches, their wooden handles worn smooth by his hands. I ran my fingers over them. It was like shaking his hand across time. Taped to the underside of the bench was a set of architectural drawings. They were blueprints for the house, but not as it was meant to be. A new porch, a bigger kitchen, an extra bedroom upstairs. For Mia. He had planned it all. He had seen the future in this broken-down place. That night, I didn't sleep in the dusty house. I couldn't. I took a blanket and slept on the floor of the barn, near my father's workbench, the smell of old wood and oil in the air. I felt closer to him there than I had anywhere else. My interactions with the wider world were brief and cautious. I walked into Harmony Creek to buy supplies: bread, peanut butter, soap, more batteries for my flashlight. The man behind the counter of the one functioning store, a place that sold a little bit of everything, was named Gus. He was old, with a face like a crumpled paper bag and eyes that missed nothing. He watched me as I paid in cash, his gaze lingering on my blistered hands and the dirt under my fingernails. "You're the kid at the old Miller place," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said, bracing for a warning or a threat. "Heard someone was fixing it up," he said, bagging my groceries. He paused. "That windmill, it used to power the whole farm, before the grid came through. Haven't seen it turn in 30 years. He slid a small complimentary box of matches across the counter. "Nights get cold," was all he said. It wasn't much. It wasn't a welcome wagon. But it wasn't hostility either. It was a simple, grudging acknowledgement. A recognition that I was here, and I was working. It was the first crack of light in the wall of my isolation. I was no longer just a ghost haunting my parents' property. I was becoming a resident. The guy fixing up the old Miller place. On the morning of the second day, I got the call from Mr. Henderson. The package had arrived. I walked the 2 miles back to Harmony Creek, my steps lighter than they had been just a few days before. The hard drive was my Excalibur. With it, I could fight. Without it, I was just a boy in a broken house. The package was a simple, padded envelope. It felt impossibly light for the weight it carried. I took it back to the barn, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I had no computer. The letters hadn't accounted for that particular 21st century problem. It was a detail so obvious, so crippling, that I laughed. A hollow, desperate sound that echoed in the cavernous space. I had the key to unlocking my family's justice, but no door to put it in. I sat on the floor, the envelope in my hands, defeated. I had been so focused on the fight, on the grand, dramatic gesture, that I had overlooked the most basic, practical step. This was the reality of it. Not a movie, not a story. Just one obstacle after another. My first thought was the library, but a town like Havenwood didn't have a library. Harmony Creek barely had a post office. The nearest city was hours away, and I couldn't risk taking the drive there, not with this in my hands. I thought back to my conversation with Gus, the store owner. He seemed to know things. He was my only link to this community. Swallowing my pride, I walked back into town. Gus was wiping down the counter when I entered. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Forgot something?" "I need a favor," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. I wasn't used to asking for help. I need to use a computer. He stopped wiping. He looked at me, his gaze sharp and assessing. He looked at the envelope I was clutching in my hand. Trouble? He asked. The kind you should run from? The kind I have to run toward, I replied, the words coming out before I could stop them. He studied my face for a long moment. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe even a ghost of respect. He let out a long sigh, as if I was a great inconvenience he had already decided to accept. My granddaughter, he said, gesturing with his head toward a back room. She's home from college. Spends all day on that damn thing. Says she's studying. He disappeared into the back. I heard a muffled conversation. A moment later he returned, followed by a young woman about my age. She had bright, intelligent eyes and a skeptical frown. This is Sarah, Gus said. Sarah, this is Leo. He needs to use your laptop for something important. Sarah looked me up and down, her skepticism deepening. I probably looked like a wild animal, unwashed, jumpy, clutching a mysterious package. What kind of important? She asked, her tone wary. I looked at Gus. I looked at Sarah. They were strangers, but my mother's letter had said to trust. Sometimes you have to take a leap. My parents, I said, my voice quiet. They were murdered. The proof is in this envelope, and I need a computer to see it. The skepticism in Sarah's eyes was replaced by a wide-eyed shock. Gus's face hardened. He looked from me to the door, as if expecting villains to burst in. In the back, he said, his voice a low command. Now. Sarah led me to a cluttered office behind the store. Her laptop was open on a desk. I plugged in the hard drive. It was password protected, just as Mr. Henderson had said. I typed in the code he'd given me. Mia's Song, 0714, July 14th, my sister's birthday. A folder opened on the screen. It was titled Contingency. My father's methodical mind at work. I clicked it open. It was all there. Scanned internal memos authorizing the illegal dumping. Spreadsheets with falsified data sent to the EPA. Email chains between executives discussing the containment of my father after he raised his initial concerns. There was even a folder of audio files. My dad had secretly recorded his meetings. I clicked on the last one. A man's voice, smooth and cold, filled the small office. You have a lovely family, David, the voice said. A boy, Leo, and a little girl, Mia. It would be a shame if something were to happen to them because their father couldn't see the big picture. My blood ran cold. This was the man who had ordered my parents' death. His name was at the bottom of the memos. Alistair Finch, Executive Vice President of Northwood Development. We had him. We had it all. Sarah was staring at the screen, her hand over her mouth. Gus stood in the doorway, his face a grim mask. What are you going to do? Sarah whispered. I'm going to burn them to the ground, I said. But it wasn't that simple. We spent the next hour making copies, uploading the files to a secure cloud server Sarah set up, copying them onto multiple thumb drives. We were building an arsenal. When we were done, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was still there, but it was now overlaid with a cold, clear purpose. You need to get this to the press, Sarah said, her voice urgent. A real journalist, someone who can't be bought. I have a lawyer, I said. He'll know what to do. As I was getting ready to leave, Gus stopped me. He pressed a heavy, old flip phone into my hand. It's a burner, he said. Untraceable. My number is the only one in it. You call me if you need anything. Anything at all. I looked at him, at his gruff, concerned face. I looked at Sarah, who was watching me with a mixture of fear and admiration. 2 days ago, I was alone. Now, I had allies. I had a team. I walked back to the farm, the burner phone a heavy, reassuring weight in my pocket. The fight wasn't just mine anymore. The next few weeks were a blur of clandestine activity and back-breaking labor. By day, I was a homesteader. I learned to patch a roof, replace a window pane, and clear a field. I found a rhythm in the work, a peace in the exhaustion. I was physically transforming the property, and in doing so, I was transforming myself. With every nail I hammered, I felt stronger. With every weed I pulled, I felt clearer. I was literally and figuratively taking back the ground my parents had bought for me. The land was responding. I cleared the creek bed, and the water ran faster and cleaner. I tilled a small patch of earth for a garden, and the soil was dark and rich. One morning, I climbed the windmill. It was a terrifying ascent up the rusted ladder, the wind whistling around me. From the top, I could see the entire valley, my 5 acres. It was a small kingdom, but it was mine. I saw the problem with the blades, a single bent strut. It was a simple, fixable problem. The giant wasn't dead, just broken. Like me. By night, I was a revolutionary. I spoke with Mr. Henderson daily on the burner phone. He was working with a respected investigative journalist from a national paper, carefully feeding her the information from the hard drive, allowing her to verify it independently. The story was too big, too dangerous, to just dump on the internet. It had to be a precision strike. "Finch is a powerful man, Leo," Mr. Henderson warned me. "He has deep pockets and a long reach. They will paint you as a disgruntled, delusional kid looking for a payday. They'll dig into your time in the system. They'll try to break you." "Let them try," I said, and I was surprised by the conviction in my own voice. I wasn't that kid anymore. I knew who I was. I was my parents' son. Sarah and Gus became my lifeline. Sarah used her college research skills to dig deeper into Northwood development, uncovering a pattern of similar land grabs and environmental violations in other states. She was building a bigger case, connecting the dots. Gus was my watchman. He kept an eye on the road, noting any strange cars, any unfamiliar faces. He'd leave supplies for me in a drop box we'd set up in the woods, along with notes. "Black sedan passed twice today. Be careful." One evening, a sleek black car I didn't recognize did pull up to the end of my drive. A man in an expensive suit got out. He didn't come onto the property. He just stood there, staring at the house, at the windmill. He was on his phone. I watched him from the barn, my heart pounding. Gus's burner phone buzzed in my pocket. "That's their local council," Gus's voice crackled. "They're getting nervous. They know something is coming. Don't engage. Just be seen." I stepped out of the barn, a hammer in my hand. I didn't look at the man. I walked over to the porch and started methodically prying off a rotten board. I was just a boy, fixing his house. I could feel the man's eyes on me. After a long, tense moment, he got back in his car and drove away. The message was clear. They were watching me. But I was sending a message back. I'm not scared. I'm not leaving. The journalist, a woman named Clara, wanted to speak with me directly. Mr. Henderson arranged a secure video call on Sarah's laptop. Clara's face was sharp, intelligent, and tired. She'd seen it all. "Leo," she said, her voice direct. I believe you. The evidence your father collected is ironclad. But Finch will bury this unless we have a human element, a face, a story. I need to tell your story, your parents' story. What do you need? I asked. Everything, she said. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about the system, about Mia, about the letters in the cellar. I told her about my father's workbench and my mother's dreams for a garden. I poured out the last 2 years of pain and the last few weeks of hope. When I was finished, there was a long silence. Clara looked at me, and for the first time, her professional mask slipped. I saw a glimpse of the woman behind the journalist. They picked a fight with the wrong family, she said softly. The article was scheduled to drop in 1 week. It would be the cover story of the Sunday magazine. The final phase of the plan was in motion. I knew that when the story broke, my life would change forever. The quiet, solitary world I had built for myself here would be shattered. But it was the only way to get justice, the only way to truly earn this home. The day before the article was published, I received a certified letter. It was a formal eviction notice from Northwood Development, claiming I was an illegal squatter. It was a desperate, clumsy move, a last-ditch effort to intimidate me. I just laughed. I tacked it to the wall of the barn, next to my father's blueprints. A trophy. That night, I climbed the windmill again. I had spent a week working on the bent strut, using a block and tackle I'd found in the barn to straighten it. Now, all it needed was a push. I waited for the wind to pick up. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, a breeze rustled the leaves. It grew stronger, a steady, insistent push. I climbed out onto the platform and put my shoulder to one of the massive blades. It groaned. I pushed harder, my muscles straining. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a slow, deep, metallic creak, it began to move. The blade caught the wind, and then the next, and the next. Slowly, ponderously, the great wheel began to turn. For the first time in 30 years, the windmill was alive. It wasn't just a symbol anymore, it was a machine. It was working, just like me. The story broke on a Sunday. It was bigger than any of us had imagined. The Miller legacy, whistleblower's son, exposes decades of corruption. My face was on the cover of a national magazine. My family's story, our story, was laid bare for the world to see. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Northwood Development. Their stock plummeted. The EPA launched a federal investigation. Alistair Finch and 2 other executives were forced to resign, and within a week, they were indicted by a federal grand jury. My parents, David and Mary Miller, were hailed as heroes. Their names were cleared. Their sacrifice was finally, publicly honored. My quiet life was over. Reporters camped out at the end of my road. News vans choked the single lane of Harmony Creek. Gus's store did more business in a week than it had in the last 10 years. I stayed inside the farmhouse, the doors locked, the curtains drawn. Mr. Henderson handled the press. Sarah and Gus ran interference. They were my wall. But the most important call came on Monday morning. It was from Ms. Albright, my old caseworker. Her voice was shaking. "Leo, I saw the news. I can't believe it. We had no idea." "I know," I said. And I did. She was a part of the system, but she wasn't the enemy. The enemy was indifference. The enemy was silence. "There's more," she said, her voice filled with a new energy. "The story, it's put a spotlight on things, on the foster system, on Mia. With the federal investigation, Northwood's assets are frozen. Their offer on your land is void, but the value of your property, your parents' name. A judge will grant you emergency guardianship of Mia without a second thought. You have a home. You have a legacy. You can bring her home, Leo. Bring her home. The words I had been waiting to hear for 2 years. The next day, I drove the 3 hours back to the city. I didn't drive the old pickup I'd managed to get running. I let Mr. Henderson drive me in his comfortable sedan. When we pulled up to the facility, the place I had walked away from just a few weeks ago, it looked smaller, less intimidating. I was a different person now. I wasn't the boy who had been kicked out. I was the man who had come back to claim his sister. Mia was waiting for me in the lobby, a single backpack at her feet. She looked older, warier, but when she saw me, her face broke into a smile that lit up the entire dreary room. She ran to me, and I held her, my face buried in her hair. She was real. She was here. We were together. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." "We did it," I corrected her. "Mom and Dad did it. We're just finishing the job." The drive back to Havenwood was quiet. Mia stared out the window, her expression unreadable, as the city gave way to the country. I was nervous. What if she hated it? What if this rustic, broken-down life I had chosen for us was her nightmare? When we turned onto Miller Road and the house came into view, with its patched roof and mismatched window panes, and the great windmill turning slowly in the breeze behind it, she gasped. "Wow," she said, her voice full of awe. "It's real." We spent the rest of the day walking the property. I showed her the creek, the barn, our father's workbench. I showed her the patch of earth that would be our garden, and the spot where our mother had wanted to plant roses. I took her to the cellar and showed her the empty milk can. I gave her the silver locket. She opened it, her eyes filling with tears as she saw our parents' faces. I had a photo of her, a school picture Ms. Albright had given me. Together, we carefully cut it out and fitted it into the empty space. A family, reunited. That night we sat on the porch, the air cool and crisp, listening to the crickets and the gentle creak of the windmill. The work was far from over. The house was still a wreck. The legal battles would likely drag on for years. Life was not going to be easy, but it was ours. "It's a lot," Mia said softly, looking up at the vast, starry sky. "I know," I said, "but it's home." It's been a year since that day. The house is still a work in progress, but it's a home. The walls are painted. There's a real kitchen with a stove that works. There are curtains on the windows, made by Mia. My father's blueprints are framed on the wall, and every day we get a little closer to what he envisioned. The garden is thriving. We eat food that we grew with our own hands. Mia found her mother's notes on planting and has a natural talent for it. She says it makes her feel close to her. The windmill has become a local landmark. Gus says people drive from the next county over just to see it turn. We don't use it for power, not yet, but it's a reminder. It's our North Star. The legal case against Northwood Development resulted in one of the largest environmental settlements in the state's history. Most of the money went into a trust to clean up the communities they had poisoned. A portion of it, a kind of restitution, was awarded to us. We're not rich, but we're secure. We used some of it to create a foundation in our parents' name, providing legal aid to other whistleblowers. Their legacy isn't just this land. It's the courage to speak truth to power. I'm learning to be a brother, a guardian, a homeowner. Mia is learning to be a sister, a daughter of this land, a teenager who can finally just be a teenager. We have good days and bad days. We still miss our parents with an ache that will never fully go away. But the grief is different now. It's not a black hole. It's a presence, a source of strength. Sometimes, when the work is done, I sit on the porch and I think about the boy who walked out of that facility with nothing but a cardboard box and a heart full of anger. He wouldn't recognize the man I'm becoming. He wouldn't believe this life was possible. Home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you build. Sometimes you have to build it out of ruins. Sometimes you have to fight for the ground it stands on. It's built with sweat and tears, with memory and hope. It's built with choices. The choice to stay when it's easier to run. The choice to fight when it's safer to be silent. The choice to believe in a future you can't yet see. This story, our story, isn't really about a windmill. It's about the fact that even when you feel lost, even when the world has written you off, there are foundations waiting to be discovered. Sometimes they're hidden in a cellar, and sometimes they're hidden inside of you. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This has been my story, but I know I'm not the only one. So many of us have stories about finding our way home, about overcoming the odds, about the families we've lost and the families we've built. This channel is a place for those stories. If my journey resonated with you, I hope you'll subscribe and become part of this community. And I want to hear from you. What does home mean to you? Have you ever had to fight for your foundation? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. Because your story matters, and you are not alone.